Welcome to the Character Sheet, your home for all things TTRPG and fantasy news. And a week or so ago, I asked you guys what you'd like to see next for our holiday week video, and you chose a ranking of the 2025 TTRPG releases. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to dive into the 15 biggest releases that we've personally had time to get our hands on here. And a quick shout out to some honorable mentions. DC 20, we have a press release early access for, but it's not really out to the public yet. So we're going to hold back on that till 2026. And Shadow Dark Western Reaches is still kind of in a shipping delay holding pattern for a little bit, so we're going to hold on for that one till 2026 as well. But for now, let's dive into the 15 we've got in front of us, and let's find out what some of the best TTRPGs of 2025 really were. Starting with Legends in the Mist. Legends of the Mist is an interesting one. It is a sort of a slow fantasy, rustic fantasy style TTRPG. It's got a narrative class and character builder to it that's almost kind of reminiscent of something like Daggerheart. But the whole point of it sort of is that you are a less powerful, less OP character at the start. You kind of have to build your way up. Things are a little slower. It's a little more slow paced, a little more narrative, but it's still got a great system at the core of it, so it's going to be very familiar to D&D players. We really enjoyed it. We also love the look of it, but it is for a very specific play style. If you want like constant action, if you're like a D&D combat maniac, probably not the system for you, but we really did enjoy it. And I think based on that strong aesthetic, we're going to sneak it into maybe just like the tail end of the A series for 2025 releases. Next up we have the Monster Manual. It's a 2024 rules edition of D&D, but it didn't come out till 2025. The Monster Manual is another strange book. It is probably the best of the 2024 rule books in actually achieving needed noticeable change. Like, it actually gave us a bunch of things we needed in D&D, like monsters that live up to their challenge ratings. It also gave us a bunch of fun variety inside of like the species of monsters. Like, there's a bunch of different kinds of skeletons now, and there's a lot of variety of like, dragons have a lot different or a lot more impact to the game and have a lot more variety as well. And everything kind of like now falls under a broader umbrella of like, you have a flaming skeleton that's part of the skeleton family of monsters. All of the monsters tend to come a little closer to hitting that CR, which is really good. But that said, this new system, while it adds a lot of variety to the subtypes of monsters, we did lose out on some overall variety of monsters, which is kind of to be expected because this is a semi-fresh reboot for D&D, but it still was the best D&D rule book of the three that came out, and so we'll sneak it into the very top of B for now. Definitely a good monster manual, but it could have had a little more variety. It was on the cusp of being something really, really good, we think. Speaking of really, really good, next up is the Stormlight Archive, the first wave of the Cosmere RPG that broke all those Kickstarter records. This is a phenomenal book. The world guide is fascinating. I sat down and read it cover to cover in about 4 hours, and it was, I almost wanted to go back and do it again. The way you build your classes and your characters is very different from D&D, but the mechanics you use to play them is almost identical. It's basically a D20 system, but with almost like an MMO style way of character building, where you can kind of like pick little bits from little different talent trees and customize the characters that you like in a really interesting and really specific way. It nails the lore. The book is also beautiful, by the way. We got the Gilded Edge edition with like the golden outside of the pages, and it looks amazing on the shelf, but it actually just plays phenomenally well, and the lore is so good, and you can tell that Brandon Sanderson had his hand all over this when it comes to crafting the look and the lore and the way that the classes in the book really feel like they're straight off the pages of the Stormlight Archive. It is perhaps the game we've played the most lately. We have that and a Draw Seal campaign going, but man, it is our first legitimate S tier for the 2025. Let's take a peek now at Alien Evolved, second edition. The Evolved edition of Aliens, technically their second edition. Aliens Evolved is pretty much just, if you like the Aliens first edition, from Free League Publishing. This is just a refinement and an improvement on all aspects of that game. The combat is smoother. There's actually rules now that help you utilize miniatures more, where there wasn't really support for miniatures in the first one. It was so kind of like non-focused on combat and more focused on survival and exploration. They did also add in like another, well, this is the pattern you're going to see here a lot, another kind of narrative character building process they call like their life path system. But basically everything about this has a little more alien flavor. There's a lot more ships from the movies and even from the TV shows showing up, but it's just kind of a nice refinement on all the things that happened in Alien First Edition, and a great example of Free League Publishing listening to the feedback and being like, oh, okay, we'll fix this. And they basically made combat tighter, a little more streamlined. Combat's now a bit more important than it was before. And if you like the Alien setting, this is the best version of the Alien RPG we've gotten so far. So this is probably another A, right up there with Legends of the Mist. Hey, speaking of stuff that I played a lot of, Draw Steel. We have talked to James Intercaso a bunch about Draw Steel. Draw Steel is every 4th edition D&D fan's dream come true. It is a tactical first RPG, like its combat is at the forefront, but the way they make you have to, you always have something to do, and B, your actions always have consequences. You have to kind of always ride that wave between pushing your luck and going further and further into more and more combats before you rest, because the more combats, the more victories you rack up, the stronger you become, and the more abilities you gain access to, the more resources you gain access to. But also at some point you do have to take that rest to actually level up your characters and consolidate those gains. So it's a great balancing act between pushing your luck and the sweet spot of leveling up, and like the power levels are really nice, and the way that you always have something to do, and that even when you miss, you still kind of achieve something in the game. You don't ever feel like you're just wasting a turn without it, being overpowered or broken in the player's favor, because obviously these are the people that made Flea Mortals. They know how to make some amazing monsters. And the monsters rulebook that comes along with this, also fantastic, not shocking at all. Draw Steel is the other game I have a big active campaign going on with right now, besides D&D, obviously, and it is one of the best systems I have ever played. It obviously goes right up with Stormlight in the S tier. Daggerheart next. Daggerheart, the Critical Role's huge hit for the year. Loved playing Daggerheart. It is definitely aimed at a specific kind of player. Mainly, it has a lot to offer for newer players. It's a great onboarding TTRPG. For veteran players, initially it might be a little light on options, but given the way they've used like the Void playtest site, and they're adding so much stuff, and with Hope and Fear coming out, like this is a game that I'm going to probably put in the kind of like mid A tier category right now, but has the potential in the next year to jump up to that S tier, because it's going to have all of those options in terms of gear and classes and additional domains that players are asking for. If you like TTRPGs and you have a bunch of friends that have never really like dived into D&D hardcore, this is a great way to introduce them to it and still keep those like veterans entertained. It's a sort of it's the gateway drug of TTRPGs for 2025, and because of that, it goes up to the A tier as well. Next one, Forgotten Realms. I'm going to lump all the Forgotten Realms stuff in here because I kind of have the same problems and the same praise for all the releases, for the adventure, for the heroes book, for the kind of throw off Asterian's Book of Hungers, and that is they nail, like, the art style's great. They do provide you a good amount of options. The subclasses are interesting. Some are powerful, some are just forever going to be a swing and a miss. Like, for some reason, Blade Singers just can never get that balance right. They start out kind of okay, but at the higher level they go, the less and less useful they appear to be. Like, they just haven't found a way to really mix sword and sorcery effectively, which is something that, as Matt Mercer can tell you, dates back to the very beginning of the game. But, man, they do have a lot of fun subclasses returning. Like, the Blade Singer's there, and it's not ideal, but we got some lot of fun subclasses. There's some pretty good lore, although the adventure's a little light on narrative. Like, the adventure's not quite where you'd hope it would be for something that was supposed to be like a big release for the year. And Asterian's Book of Hungers is kind of like a fun like add-on. We love Asterian, we love anything involving him, and we love anything involving Neil Newbon for that matter. But all said and done, like this is probably a solid B. Like it could have been better. It could have had a few more things in there. Like the factions being added is just kind of like a recycled version of the old Adventurers League rules with a few more add-ons, but could have been a lot more. But it's a great step in the right direction for D&D, especially compared to their other release that we'll talk about when we get down to the end of this list. Next up is the Field Guide to Floral Dragons. This is a fun one. This is a wonderfully, beautifully aesthetic book that is also completely unnecessary at the same time, but that's kind of the point. It is a book full of, I think it's like 27 different dragons, which do have like 5e stats. You can, and they do have like some fun lore. It's much more of like a lore book and an art book than a full-fledged TTRPG book. But what it does extremely well. Like it's like the perfect coffee table book. It's one of those things where you just leave out lying around and people just start like thumbing through it and 30 minutes pass. But in terms of a TTRPG book, and I love Hit Point Press and I love a lot of the stuff they do, this one is just so specifically niche and unnecessary that while it made a ton of money, like made over $1 million on Kickstarter last year before it came out this year, and is definitely, if you are in that niche, this is an amazing book. I think like the idea of needing floral dragons is so specifically niche, and there's so few people that could probably work it into a campaign without having to like rejigger their campaign entirely, that this is a C with a lot of reservation. This is a C, but if you really love, flower, if you're big into botany and you want to make a new campaign from scratch, this could jump as high as an A. But I think for most of us, this is a C, but a beautiful C, if that makes any sense. Speaking of C's, we are investigating the Sea of Stars with Starfinder 2nd edition. The playtest came out over a year ago. Paizo took a lot of time listening to the fans, getting the feedback just right, and they finally kind of dialed it into it's much more of the sci-fi equivalent of the new Pathfinder than the old version of Starfinder was to the old Pathfinder. The stamina system that a lot of people, myself included, just kind of hated is now gone. And it's just back to an armor class system, thank God, because there was just no real need for that stamina system. They also did some great stuff with the gear. The gear is now scalable, the way that you can scale stuff in Pathfinder with like runes. So you're not doing that thing like you had to do in old Starfinder, where it's like, oh great, I leveled up, and now I have all this level 3 gear on my level 7 character, on my level 7 Vanguard. So now I've got to go buy a bunch of level 7 or 8 stuff, and I've got to check availability and see if the space station I'm at would even have stuff at that level. This is much more scalable and approachable. It's basically just that Pathfinder 2 Remastered Edition smashed into the Starfinder setting, but in a very successful way. We're always suckers for Starfinder. Like Starfinder is one of our favorite systems, and this is the best version of Starfinder we've ever seen. And I think because of that, it goes very front of A, maybe an S. Yeah, you know what? Back to the S. It's a great system. If you love Starfinder, it's never been better. Go check it out now. Oh, next, Crooked Moon. I was supposed to do an unboxing for this. I apologize to the Legend of Evantris people, but I got like super sick and then had to have my wisdom teeth taken out, and that screwed up my whole schedule. But Crooked Moon is the best 5e supplement out this year. It just is. It is a great example of how to make interesting, like lore-rich but still useful and powerful subclasses with a bunch of awesome folk horror flavor to them. Like this is a great, and it's also a thick book, by the way. It's got a lot of content for your money. Crooked Moon is such a great setting, and is such a underserved niche. Like folk horror is pretty big. We saw elements of that with Candela Obscura when Critical Role kind of tried their hand at it. Crooked Moon is probably a much more successful version of that because it is just a classic 5e system with a bunch of new subclasses and feats and spells and equipment that all kind of fit that folk horror aesthetic. I love this thing. I think if you like horror at all, this is an S. I think the only reason this goes to top of A for me is just because not everyone loves horror, as we found out with Candela Obscura. But if you love horror, this is an easy S. I think, to be fair, I have to put it at like the top of the A's. But man, if you like folk horror at all, or if you just are a D&D fan that wants a bunch of interesting new domains for stuff like druids and rangers and clerics to like check out that are just very evocative and very useful and powerful without being broken, like Crooked Moon is a crazy good TTRPG to come out of someone's first effort. And the Legends of Evantris team, hats off to you. This game is amazing. Boop to the front of A. Next up, we have Age of Vikings from Chaosium. Age of Vikings is a basic role-playing system game, so it's that classic Chaosium D100 system that Call of Cthulhu fans might be familiar with. It is basically their heroic version of that, set in an Icelandic or a mythological Iceland. Big Viking flavor, obviously. A lot of fun, very interesting classes that are built around that folklore and mythology of the Vikings. You've got, a lot of classes that are going to be very familiar to fans of like Nordic and Scandinavian mythology. Once again, that kind of does bottle its audience into a bit of a niche, but it's also really, really well done. If you like D100 systems, and if you're a Call of Cthulhu fan or an old Warhammer Fantasy fan, you'll be really familiar with them. Like, they have their ups and downs. It is perhaps a bit more number crunching, but it's also a little more fair and flexible because you have a wider range to work with in terms of leveling things from a design perspective. I really enjoyed this. I'm a big fan of Viking stuff. I'm part Scandinavian, so I really enjoy it. I think for most people, this would fall solidly into the B realm, but if you are a fan of the basic role-playing system and you like that D100, this is probably an easy A for you. Next up, Dolmenwood. Dolmenwood was a lot of hype going into the year. It's another one of those classic role-playing games, or old school essentials, rather, sorry. So this is that old school essential system that we saw come out in the last few years, where it's kind of harkens back to that advanced D&D rule system. Dolmenwood adds a lot of new classes and adds a lot of this fun British folklore and mythology to it. And the setting itself is pretty interesting, kind of this, not really grim dark, but sort of dank and like very English flavored fantasy setting full of like moths and spores and like the Fae court and fairies. And it's got a very specific vibe to it, but it's also, I would say, wide enough in its focus to not kind of, put it into that sort of, corner, put it into that niche that we've talked about with some of these other ones. If you like that classic Advanced Dungeons and Dragons feel, that old school Essentials rule system, you're going to really, really enjoy Dolmenwood, which is probably the best thing ever released for it, and is completely compatible with it. We really enjoyed the little bit of time we spent with Dolmenwood. We liked all the new class options. There's some fun stuff in there. We liked the take on friars, which brings us back to the old school D&D version of monks. There's a lot of really fun stuff in here. And if you're willing to, take the risk of running that old school essential system, which is a little more prone to character death than modern D&D players may be used to, Dolmenwood's a great game, and I think that deserves an A from us. Next up, we have Exodus. Exodus is another strange game in that we really enjoyed it, but it kind of barely got released by Wizards of the Coast. It kind of got stealth launched. It's effectively just the D&D system, the 5th E version for the most part, ported into a sci-fi setting, but the sci-fi setting is absolutely incredible. This game was built kind of around the upcoming Exodus video game by Wizards of the Coast, the one that just saw James Olin leave the project and leave Archetype Studios, but James Olin left to kind of focus on more stuff like this, which is really, really interesting. And before he left, he also hired a bunch of sci-fi heavy hitters to help with the lore and the setting for this game. And we're talking like big names, like Peter F. Hamilton of like Fallen Dragon fame. One of our favorite sci-fi authors helped build this world. And this really interesting universe of like faster than light travel and the like all the races and all the cool monsters that go along with it really deserved a lot better than a sort of secret stealth launch by D&D if it's going to kind of be their answer to Starfinder, which it really sort of is, because it's a direct port of 5th edition mechanics. We actually really, really liked Exodus. We think it was probably the best thing Wizards of the Coast released last year. And it's just a shame that it only got such a limited release, but we think it goes up into the A category. Because, man, if you can find a copy, do, because you're going to really enjoy what you get your hands on. All right, and we're back, because I realized I'd left off one of the 15, and I'd put in Starfinder twice, and that is Coriolis, which we're going to get to in a second. But let's talk about D&D's last big release for the year, Eberron, Forge of the Artificer. This brings you basically 5 subclasses and officially reintroduces the Artificer class itself into the 2024 rules. And while this version of the Artificer is definitely a little stronger and better than previous versions, it's a lot to ask for a just standalone book. And some of the subclasses, like we're huge fans of alchemists and fantasy in general, and for like the 3rd time in a row, they've really sort of kind of missed the mark on what an alchemist is supposed to do, at least in our minds, with this set of subclasses. They also might have one slightly broken one, where you're basically just running around as a sort of heavily armored warcaster, just taking very little damage and just blowing everything up. But it's got it's not quite as bad as the 5th edition Artificer. It's certainly an improvement on that. Having it be its own standalone book was always a strange choice, as the Artificer class just probably isn't a strong enough class in terms of being able to carry a release on its own. And while this does include some fun Eberron lore, it also doesn't include a ton of that lore. It's a relatively thin book for what it brings to the table. And it just doesn't bring a lot in terms of value. If you love Artificers, this is a must-have book, but if you don't, I don't understand why you'd ever buy the book. So it's a very odd choice from Wizards of the Coast. I mean, because with just a very few little smatterings of Eberron goodness like sprinkled on top of the main bulk of the book, which is all Artificer-based, we'd probably put this as a C. But if you are a big Artificer fan, probably a B. But definitely one of the least necessary D&D books of the year, and just a kind of a strange way to introduce one of your core classes to a game that only has, I think at this point, 13 of them. But finally, Coriolis, the Dark Age. Or Coriolis, the Great Dark, sorry. I always want to call it the Dark Age. That's a different RPG from a long time ago. But Coriolis, the Great Dark is a Year Zero engine game from Free League Publishing. It's got another one of those sci-fi settings that we just spent a while talking about how much we loved. This one is sort of putting you in the role of an explorer with a sort of lost splinter of humanity that's kind of been cast out from civilization and trying to make it on their own, like deep, deep, deep in space. And you're sort of forced to go on missions and runs and scouting errands to scavenge and survive and bring resources back and basically to keep humanity alive. It's a really interesting combination of that like Warhammer aesthetic grimdark, but also with a lot more hope and, you know, some possibility of actually achieving something in a way that you don't normally see in something like 40K. It's probably a little bit closer to Starfinder in that sense. And the Year Zero engine is very interesting. We've always kind of enjoyed it. We like the way that as you get better in a skill, you simply like level up the dice you use. So you start from a D6 and you go up to like a D12. So it's a fun system. It makes a lot of sense in the setting as you know, things get bigger and bigger stakes, the more skilled you are. And we do like this sort of new take on the sci-fi setting where it's a lot about, you know, exploration. It's kind of almost got like a Star Trek-y feel to it, despite the grimdark aesthetic of it all. And if you like trying out new systems, if you're not afraid of going to a system that starts out as fundamentally a bunch of D6s, which some people immediately got turned off of Candela and, you know, Blades in the Dark for having that similar start, but this one quickly evolves into something different and something pretty special. We think Coriolis is right up there with Aliens as like one of the best things that Free League's published all year, so we're going to also leave it right up there in the A slot. And there you go. And that's our ranking of the 15 biggest RPGs of 2025 that we personally got some time with and got to try hands-on. There are, of course, several releases that we didn't get to go over that either weren't like a full TTRPG or we just couldn't get our hands on. We didn't feel fair making a judgment on it.